stand the thought you might like him. I hate that it's true, but I see him the way he sees you. Conversations I imagine where he'll take me by the hand, 'cause I'm all he's ever wanted, and tell me that he's loved me since the moment I'd forgotten, till he'd remind me, describe everything he noticed when we met about a year ago. The hairstyle and the dress, I hope he'd remember, 'cause it's all he ever says about you, and you're laughing and push him aside and get flowers from somebody else. He's all I want and it's hell. So maybe I'm selfish for feeling this way, but I can't pretend I don't hate that he stays awake every night just to talk on the phone about how he's in love with a girl who doesn't know, and he's falling far faster than he has for any other girl that he has in the past. And I hate that I can't stand the thought you might like him. I hate that it's true, but I see him the way he sees you. And I don't see how you don't too. I'm not put together, I'm not made of clay. You can try and stick me together, but I promise I won't stay. I'm not like you, I'm always blue. There's nothing you can do. You don't like me, but I love me. There's nothing my heart I can do. I can't do you for you. I am fine china, like the carvings on his wall. It gets bored of me.
View of the classical music industry and Royal Academy of Music perspectives on socially engaged practice. And then I'll look at a case study, which is the Connection Project, which is a centre in London for people experiencing homelessness, and some work I do there with an orchestra and some of our students. And then we'll wrap it up with a few thoughts about training the musicians of the future. So, socially engaged practice is broadly defined as artistic practice that intentionally engages with social contexts or agendas or communities. So it's things like community choirs, it's your band going and making music in a prison, it's kind of mum and baby groups, so there's a massive range of those contexts. What you can see on the screen is the orchestra, the Academy of St Martin in the Fields, along with the Gavin Bryars Band, along with a training orchestra for recent music graduates, which is called Smith Square Symphonia. You've got on the right-hand side there singers from Streetwise Opera, and then somewhere there in the background, you can't really see us, is a band made up of service users from the Connection Centre for Homelessness. And we're performing at Tate Modern, we're performing a 12-hour version of Gavin Bryars' piece, Never Failed Me Yet. So this is a version of socially engaged practice because it's confronting issues of rough sleeping and spiritual faith. It's trying to break through sort of stereotypes in that way. And it literally engages people with lived experience of homelessness alongside professional musicians. So this kind of practice is pretty commonplace, actually, with orchestras, especially in the UK. In a way, we've sort of really led the world in this. And that's partly driven by changes in Arts Council policy, which in 1990 required outreach activity as a condition of funding. So there was a rapid sort of change in orchestral and arts organisation activity to include various forms of outreach. But there was also a quick recognition to the intrinsic value of the practice, particularly in its potential to develop audiences. So this is about broadening reach, to develop musicians, so putting people into a smaller scale. You know, if you send 3 musicians from an orchestra out into a care home, it's not going to be the artistic planning team that tell them what to play. It will be those musicians. They get to decide what they're going to play. They get to introduce their music. And it also fosters musicians' creativity. So a lot of socially engaged practice is about co-creativity. It's about actually bringing tools and skills into different contexts and making music in sort of dynamic ways with different people. That, of course, means that musicians, you know, the life of a classical musician is you go on tour, you get booked for gigs, you're told what to play, you're told what to wear. There's kind of not a lot of creative agency involved in that. And, of course, people love it and are amazing at it and have a tiny amount of agency in how they play that little bit of Mozart. But in broad terms, as an artistic practice, it's fairly sort of top down. So these are areas, and this practice really does kind of foster creativity in classical musicians. There's a current turn, which is quite significant, in towards music and healthcare, which is partly about the recognition of the health benefits of music. And there's quite a lot of work going on in this area now within classical music. So an example is the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra's Strokestra project, in which they work with people recovering from stroke and alongside RPO musicians. And that happens in about 5 or 6 places up and down the country. They get together and they create work as orchestras. Work in healthcare now constitutes a substantial proportion of socially engaged income for many arts organisations and has become an established component of their business models. The accumulated success of the past 40 years is evident in positive participant feedback, increased musician satisfaction and purpose, greater creative agency, and how easily this precarious work integrates into portfolio careers. It's become, the situation now is that most, you know, the 5 days, 7 days a week playing with an orchestra or in an opera house, those jobs don't really exist anymore. They're very much part-time, and the norm is portfolio careers. So this work pattern fits very well with that. So thinking about our students at the Royal Academy of Music, we're trying to train students and prepare them for industry. And we need to address this seismic change in what their working life is going to look like. So we've moved from a traditional performance and composition training to include the option, and it's still an option, the option to develop socially engaged practice skills via my department, which is called Open Academy. So Open Academy sits within academic skills, academic studies rather, and we run elective modules for undergraduates and postgraduates in workshop leading skills and music and healthcare. Students taking our modules learn through theory. For example, they learn about safeguarding, they learn about different forms of practice in healthcare. They learn practical skills development, such as improvisation. They also learn workshop leading skills as well. And they develop a reflective practice with regular reflection and evaluation sessions. So that's your kind of level 6 kind of critical awareness. They use their own experience to critique the literature in community music. So their work is underpinned theoretically and musically. But the highlight for them is nearly always the embedded learning that happens in their community placements. So they get to work on projects in schools, hospitals, care homes, in nurseries, in special educational needs, or with people experiencing homelessness. So I'm going to talk about this, one of our placement projects. It's a partnership between industry, education and the third sector. So we've got the Royal Academy of Music, which basically contributes my time on the project. We've got the Connection Centre for Homelessness, which gives us a space and project worker support. And we've got the Academy of St Martin in the Fields, who really drive the funding side of this. And they supply some of their musicians to take part in this work. We run weekly creative music workshops, so it's an ongoing project. My question is always, what do we all sound like together? So you've got people who, with lived experience of homelessness, many people on our project are rough sleepers, and then you've got world-class orchestral musicians, and then you've got our music students. What does it sound like when we get together and work creatively? And then also the other question is, what's empowering? So what's actually empowering the participants, and what's also empowering for everyone that's involved in the project, staff and students as well? So thinking about our practice, it's an open group. That means anyone can drop in at any time. We do have a core group of attendees. At the moment, there's 4 or 5 people that come nearly every week, so we've got quite an ongoing working relationship with them. And then the musicians from the orchestra and my students come for anything from sort of 2 to 6 weeks. So that population of classical musicians is always changing as well. The practice is improvisation-based, which can accommodate those changes. We sometimes move towards songwriting. What's really important is that we work towards public performances and outcomes. That's kind of an interesting one, because it's sort of, people kept saying, don't do that when I started the project, because it's sort of seen as a bit of a stressor, but it's turned out to be one of the key important things that we do in the project that really does make quite a difference to people. And the aim overall is to create an environment for musical empowerment. So this isn't about people reaching out and being nice and being Lady Bountiful. It's just a very, very honest exchange of views. And one of the cellists sort of said recently, so the idea that people have, or just their sort of emotional honesty, there's a lot of cut through any kind of BS. So if we do something that people in the workshop don't like, we'll know about it. And that agency is really important. So I'm going to play a recording from one of our rehearsals so you can see what this sounds like. It's going to be accompanied by a slideshow from a performance at the Stone Nest. You'll hear a song written by someone who's asked me to call him Mr. Shake. And it's arranged by the group. So through this process of improvisation, refining our ideas, the song is about finding a pearl at the bottom of the ocean. And it's a recording from our rehearsal space, so the quality is like, it's not amazing studio quality at all, but I hope you can hear through that. This song is called The Bottom of the Sea. And I'm hoping I can get it to... What did I need to do to get it to play?
Let me just quickly do it for you.
Oh, yeah, cool.
Okay,
thank you. So in our workshops, thank you, yeah, we see changes in mood. We see that happen pretty much every week. We see connections develop between people who are otherwise quite socially isolated, and we also see musical skills develop and flourish. So we know that people's well-being is affected, but we don't know how. And this actually reflects a broader problem in the academic arts and health research, which for years and years has looked at health and well-being outcomes, and it's measured those. It's measured well-being. There are well-being scales that are tried and tested and that we can use. But actually, it doesn't tell us anything about the music, which is actually doing the heavy lifting in this scenario. So we've started to do a research project which addresses this, and it focuses on empowerment, because we believe that empowerment strengthens well-being. The group of people we're working with are structurally very, very disempowered. And the orchestra actually, in its own way, is trying to address issues of empowerment within classical music. So they're trying not to be so top-down and to provide a broader range of opportunities for players. So this is funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council and the Limbury Trust. Our research question is, how do we recognise, enact and nurture musical empowerment for everyone on this project? So everyone includes the participants and all of the musicians and team members. We've done this by running 3 lab days, so 3 practice-based lab days with a core team of researchers. So that includes service users, that includes people that work at the Connection, the staff there. It includes the musicians and the research and the research producer. Each of those people will bring very different perspectives, and it's precisely that variety of perspectives and lived experience that is valued. I could talk about this methodology because it was so complex all afternoon, but I'm not going to. If anyone wants to talk about the finer points of involving rough sleepers in ongoing research, that's an interesting conversation. But these are some of our findings. So the first 2 really look at risk-taking, and these were things that came up as we discussed our research. You know, we did some playing, we recorded it on video, we looked at the videos, we looked back at them, and I recorded what everyone said, and I've coded it thematically. These are some of the things that people say about our practice. The first 2 are about risk-taking and levelling. So the fact that everyone's taking risks and that the musicians from the orchestra also feel that they're taking creative risks and feel a vulnerability in that environment. That kind of creates its own sort of sense of levelling, but there are also deliberate levelling activities. So starting very, very simply in ways that can include everyone. So the very first thing that I do when people walk through the door is see if we can just play a beat together. And then it goes from there into how to jam and how to be sort of more creative. So risk-taking and levelling, and then there's some stuff that people feel is important about autonomy. So it's important that they have autonomy of choice. They're bringing their creative selves to the sessions. That's partly through use of improvisation, but they've framed it in our discussions around a sense of collective responsibility. So either being responsible for bringing change to the music, which is a brave thing to do, I think, if you're not used to improvising, and that prevents it from sort of getting stuck in a groove. Or conversely, if things are going a bit sort of off, sometimes someone will take the initiative to underpin what's going on, like with a really solid bass or drum texture. But those decisions are coming from people within the group, so from autonomous choice of how they want to contribute. Finally, sounding coherent is really important, and it's balanced with the potential variety of ideas, people coming from different backgrounds, from different cultures, and the ideal really that all artistic voices are heard in this group, so it's not sort of like dominated by any one type of music. So these elements of our practice can also be linked more directly to ideas of empowerment. So again, through thematic coding of focus group discussions, we talked about how people felt about the music group and what they found empowering. Mostly I found that people didn't directly address the question of empowerment. They talked about what they liked about the music group and what they thought was working and what they wanted to do more of and less of. But actually reading into what they were saying, so our dimensions of empowerment are creative practices, the way that we make music together, that the music matters, that there's an authenticity and quality, there's an autonomy of choice, and a mix of genres, so kind of what I've just been talking about, really. Also important is the idea of risk and risk reduction. So there are personal challenges, there are structural challenges, there might be barriers to taking part, and then there are levelling activities, which are musical things that I've talked about, but also the way that people are in the group and the sort of warmth and kind of kindness that comes out that actually make things psychologically safe and sort of reduce the risk in that way. Another important thing that came up was relatedness. So that was attunement, so understanding how other people in the band play, and that obviously comes after a bit of time and accumulated experience, but knowing what other people can do and what you're going to do in order to egg that person on a little bit. Inclusions felt to be important, so the kind of language that we use and the kind of music that we're making. And then what surprised me was the idea of presence. And the people that thought it was important to be present were the rough sleepers, because they're saying, everywhere else in my life, it doesn't matter if I'm there or not. Here, it matters that I come. It matters that I come, and if I come, it encourages other people to come. So given that the musicians are sort of slightly dipping in and out of this around their touring schedules, we've got sort of quite an interesting contrast in perspective relating to people's background experiences there. The last two, motivation. It's a motivating group. People are motivated and they motivate one another. So they're partly motivated by learning the instruments and progressing on the instruments, and they're motivated by the fact that it's a weekly thing. They're also motivated to build towards performances. So there's a lot of motivating factors. And then the last group of things that at the moment I'm calling rising, but might get called something else, is things like people are building skills and a sense of self-efficacy. I'm good at this, I can do it. And also responsibility to other people in the group and achievement. So all of these things we feel supports empowerment, and we've begun to build collectively a model of empowerment. So this has happened through focus group discussion and refinement. So we got inputs, empowerment happening and outcomes, and you can sort of see on the slide the kind of things that we've sort of considered for those. And then these themes about empowerment are all in the middle. I'm going to zap through. Implications for our practice. We know we're doing the right thing, and how improvising, autonomy, attunement, performance, and self-efficacy relate to empowerment for our whole team. At the moment, the study is very contextual. I'm hoping that through practice and through training, we can sort of scale up some of what we're doing, particularly with our artistic team and other workshop leaders that come and work on the project in other places as well. We've got some lovely quotes here. I just love this one from Chris, who's playing percussion in that slideshow there. He says, there's like a me and a we, isn't it? What I need to do, what other people are doing, and what we'll do together. So this person who's kind of very alone and, you know, all sorts of kind of challenges, is really using that space to really, really connect and imagine and empathise with who else is there. For our students, through the whole Open Academy programme, we're expanding employment opportunities in an otherwise fairly sort of challenging and bleak landscape through this public engagement with different communities and through the music and health area. It is growthful. It's one of the few growthful areas at the moment. Classical musicians everywhere are broadening their skills and finding this rewarding creatively and personally. So it's not just about filling diaries. And we're preparing our students for this, embarking on rich experience embedded in communities for them. So it's like, yes, it's about preparing them, but it's also about enriching their learning experience. One of our students said this in their evaluation essay at the end of their study, at the end of their module: working in the field of community and participation allows us, as musicians, to constantly put into perspective why we do what we do, which is kind of, they don't all say things like that, but that one was like really heartening to me. It's like, yes, why we do what we do, right? We can all relate to that. I'll leave you to read that if you're bored with the questions, but thanks very much. And if you have any questions, happy to answer them.
The crowd first. I've got plenty in my mind. Maybe we need a separate occasion for that. Right? Could we get some microphones down here, please? Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's really great to to see the Royal Academy putting some focus on this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
I'm curious, two things. Have you had any challenge within the institution from this in terms of buy-in? And if so, what was the sort of background behind that? And then also, in terms of further collaboration, obviously we know that this is something that is not sort of completely foregrounded with classical playing, is improvisation and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But for contemporary players like us, it's kind of our bread and butter.
Yeah.
Have you thought about further collaboration and bringing these two worlds together? Because that could be quite interesting to see those barriers break down even further from people who sort of live and breathe this kind of practice.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, one of the reasons I'm here today is because you do live and breathe this practice. It's like you have the, your students have the skills in a way that my students perhaps don't, or don't as much. And so, so absolutely, definitely. And yes, I have worked across different genres and bringing musicians from different genres together and kind of co-creating stuff in that way. And there was another question that was the first one. Oh, yeah. It's still an elective, and thus it remains. So it's still an elective. It's challenging in itself that it's an elective because it's perhaps seen as marginal, but until lots and lots of students are choosing to do it, I suppose, they come to the Royal Academy to play piano concertos, and if that's what they choose to do, it's what they choose to do. Okay, fine. Generally within the institution, amongst my colleagues, there's a lot of support for what we do, and it's seen as a good exemplar of our work. It's good for our brand. We know it enriches the student experience, and they get lots of positive feedback. So where it sits at the moment is very positive at the Royal Academy of Music. Where it could grow to is maybe the area of challenge. Yeah.
Just a thought to add to that. So I think it's interesting when you talk about the contemporary improvisers versus classical, there's a different risk assessment there as well. So I think when you were saying with the classical musicians, everyone is investing risk.
Yeah.
Talking in broad, probably stereotypical terms, classical musicians are less likely to be trained in improvisation, so their investment is that's the risk for them almost, being vulnerable in that sense, perhaps.
Massively, yeah.
Tony, then Shane, if that's okay.
Institutions like my own and this one here, sadly, aren't in receipt of the additional £4.9 million that you get for world leading.
Yeah.
So we can't engage in opening up programs like this. Has the Academy thought of challenging the utter injustice of that model by working collaboratively with providers like us to do exactly what you want to do, which is expand the project?
Yeah, I'm sure it has thought about it. Most of our funding comes from fundraising that happens separately and not the Academy's Office for Students funding. So there is that. There is funding out there for this work if that's what you want to do. And it is the kind of private trusts and kind of businesses that are willing to kind of sponsor this type of work. Like Wimpy Homes have sponsored some of our work previously of this connection with homelessness. So those connections there, I think our priority is to work with local people in our community in and around sort of Camden and Westminster. So it might be a question of priorities. Yeah. Yeah, I'm aware of all the injustice around how arts funding plays out. It's like, I agree, it's a problem. Yeah.
Yeah. Totally music to my ears. Have been running for about 5 years a module called Songwriting and Communities where the students, second year students, go out and write in whatever context, and the transformational experience for them and, you know, for everyone. I must say that piece of music you played, for me, was stunning, absolutely stunning. And I want to know if you've had many discussions at work about what good music is.
So ongoingly, there are reflective discussions. That's part of our practice. So when we're jamming and making a piece together, I guess we're not talking about an abstract thing of what's good music, but we're saying, what do we want to keep? What do we want to change? What's working there? So it comes through that sort of reflective discussion a little bit more. But yeah.
Just to offer then, when I think about the gap, the marginalisation of this project from the concerto comes at its root, I guess, a value judgment about what is good. And isn't it bonkers that in all the research, the music itself isn't considered as a unit of research? Because historically, community music is the lowest common denominator. And so I think there's just very interesting looking at legitimising the music itself, which I thought was absolutely beautiful in that moment, from Mr. I forgot his name, Mr. Shake, and the drummer and the French horn player whose eyes were fixed on his collaborator, and what that does for our students when they then come back to their ensemble, and how they're looking and listening and behaving and understanding what good music is.
Absolutely. And I think it's a huge area, isn't it? And it comes down to legitimising structures and aesthetics. I think the key thing for me is that everyone's voice is heard. It's really important. It's like we don't want to be squashing people and marginalising them even more. And I think there's got to be that sort of clarity of intent, and that is important. But it becomes really hard to compare it to a piece of Tchaikovsky, and that's actually a dangerous route to go down for our students, because, you know, you can imagine the sort of tailspin it takes people into. It's like, oh, that almost sounded like it was pre-written, and it's like, well, that doesn't make it better. You know, this is good because it's improvised and it's happening there, and then won't ever be like this again. So I think there are all sorts of ways in which this practice and this music sort of subverts aesthetics as well.
Okay, we've got one more. Is that, I can't.
Yes, it's Gordon.
Yes.
So we've recently had the largest ever funding for an arts and health project funding, the Shaper project, which was concluded about a year ago. I think it was Arts and Humanities Research Council. The outcomes of that have been published. There's some more stuff being published on that in the coming months. Do you see an opportunity to essentially take the outputs of the findings there, where essentially, I should imagine, the positive benefits are all very much in the evaluation? Do you see opportunities to continue that as part of legacy, or do you see more this being an area of future funding for government and interest as part of what they're doing moving forward?
Okay, I didn't quite understand the question. So
the Shaper
you're talking
project,
about using the outcomes of...
So there's been a big funding funded project, the Shaper project for arts in health. It was King's and English National Ballet, several others were in it. Essentially, that was the largest ever amount of money that went into arts and health research area. The findings have just been published now. Do you think that it's signalling from a government perspective interest in this area for future funding pots? And is there anything you think from that project could be built upon? Okay, so I've not read that report yet, so I'm not sure what they've said, but I think things are changing at sort of policy level, because we've got things like social prescribing, and then at a sort of lower down level, there are various kind of the Creative Health and Wellbeing Alliance and London Arts and Health.
there are various forums now where we're having some interesting sort of cross-disciplinary discussions to sort of see how some of this work might be embedded. There are lots of questions for me because, you know, everything's very dominated by the medical gaze, and it's really important that we talk about the music and what's happening in the music, you know, for all sorts of reasons. And not least of which is to do with sort of aesthetic quality. And I think if what we did in that group always sounded really duff, it wouldn't have quite the well-being outcomes and the empowerment type outcomes that it has, if you see what I mean. So the two things go together. The conversation needs to happen a little bit differently, but it will take lots of artists, I think, to be part of those discussions and to really kind of assert that agenda.
Okay, so thank you very much, Jackie. We're going to move on, if that's okay. I'm going to ask Poppy to help with the tech. Is that okay? Cheers, thanks. Okay, so next we have from the University of Kent, Dr. Freya Vass, who's going to be presenting on developing a quadruple threat pedagogy for the musician actor. Over to you, Freya.
Okay. And now for something completely different. When you go to see a musical theater performance, you experience the genre's canonical standard, the integration of music, acting, singing, and usually some level of dance or choreographed movement. However, musical theater scholar Scott McMillan refutes the idea that integration is the standard towards which musicals matured. Instead, he asserts that at their best, musicals impact through the array of differences that define the genre, the temporal linearity of speech versus the cyclical nature of song, the shifts between the modes of spoken, sung, and danced expressiveness, and the plot-driven unfolding of characters' knowledge versus the prescient revelation of information to audiences by the orchestra or band through music and motifs. Just as audiences accept the fundamental doubling of performer and portrayed character, they also accept musical theater characters living simultaneously in the worlds of story and of musical numbers. In signaling the importance of temporal, expressive, and narrative differences across musical theater's modes of expression, Macmillan calls attention to the intermedial impact achieved when performers shift between or blend the registers of acting, singing, and dancing. Though not typically equally balanced across all musicals or performers, intermedial skill reaches a peak in the triple threat performance of the actor, singer, dancer who demonstrates expertise in all three domains. However, triple threat performance remains supported by subordinate music that is relegated to the category of accompaniment and either invisible in the pit or scenographically sidelined as a stage band. The actor-musician musical, which I'll be discussing today, takes intermediality a step further by consolidating all aspects of the musical, the acting, singing, dancing, and the music making, into the cast of characters. In creating and performing actor-musician shows, intermediality is navigated in new ways that are both exciting and demanding. Jeremy Harrison has been an actor, musician, director, music director, and composer, and in 2004 developed Rose Bruford's groundbreaking actor-musician BA course. In his 2016 volume, the only current publication on the subgenre, he takes the position that though actor-musicians may be highly accomplished instrumentalists, they are actors first, working differently than pit musicians and enabling different outcomes. The primary sensitivity they bring to music making, he holds, is that of the actor rather than the musician. This view informs the volume's pedagogical perspective as well as current actor-musician training broadly. He further notes, for those musicians who venture into acting, the journey can be quite different. This quite different journey is the focus of my talk today. In effect, I conduct a bit of a thought experiment and ask, if the primary sensitivity of the musician is instead brought to bear on the acting, as well as the singing and dancing, how might this impact quadruple threat training? And what, by extension, might be potentialized in quadruple threat performance? This explains my presentation title's inversion to musician-actor, and this will also require unpacking the primary sensitivity of the musician. But before I speculate about where the musician-actor might take us, a quick bit about how we got here. Discounting commedia dell'arte in the 16th to 18th centuries, the first true triple threat performers include Bilbo Jangles Robinson, the likes of Fred Astaire in classical movie musicals. Broadway's Oklahoma featured a chorus of singing, dancing actors in '43, but substituted the non-dancing leads with dancers in the Dream Ballet scene, while in the 1957 West Side Story, up at the top, directed by choreographer Jerome Robbins, this featured a full cast of singing, dancing actors, again with the exception of the lead couple. Starring in Bob Fosse's musicals in the 1950s, Gwen Verdon set the standard for triple threats in later musicals, from A Chorus Line to Cats. In some musicals, stage bands began joining the on-stage cast in isolated scenes, like here in the 1966 Cabaret and in Come From Away's barroom scene. Other musicals, such as The School of Rock, employ the classic let's put on a show musical theater device to bring music-making actors on stage. However, these and similar shows still have the support of either pit bands or digital music elements. Precedences in the development of the actor-musician musical include Joan Littlewood's community-engaged productions and Peter Cheeseman's inclusion of singing actors and on-stage bands in plays in the 1960s. Glenn Walford, founder of Bubble Theatre in 1972, similarly aimed for community appeal by bringing an eclectic commedia dell'arte-infused skill mix to the stage. Bob Carlton, who became the Bubble's artistic director in 1979, developed the landmark production Return to the Forbidden Planet, a Shakespearean sci-fi jukebox show that premiered in 1983 with a full cast of singing, dancing, acting instrumentalists. Forbidden Planet's success in the West End and beyond vouches not only for its rock score's appeal to popular audiences, but also to the appeal of the multi-talented quadruple threat performer. Director John Doyle's groundbreaking adaptations of Candide, Sweeney Todd, and numerous other productions for the Watermill Theatre have substantially further influenced the developing hybrid form. Thanks to musical theater's conventions, audiences are accustomed to suspending disbelief when performers burst into song or into synchronized choreography to music that just seems to come from out of the blue. However, adaptations of previous musicals offer little or no plot justification for instrumental playing. For these shows, creative teams and performers must manage a further suspension of disbelief, as when instrumental playing is not explained by the story, music making and characterization must be reconciled in such a way that the presence, sound, and actions of playing instruments mesh with the dramaturgy. For example, John Doyle's choice to have the brassy, somewhat unhinged Mrs. Lovett in Sweeney Todd play a tuba. Along with developing acting, speaking, singing, and dance skills, acting musicians must also develop practical skills, such as learning parts by heart, negotiating ensemble playing without a director, activating the eyes for interaction on stage and with the audience, sensitizing the body to stage space and action, and crucially, acting through the instrument, building character identities, as well as exploring the potential of representing objects with them. Current BA courses in actor musicianship offer training specifically geared towards developing and integrating these skills, with their third years strongly oriented toward professional industry practice. This training model aligns with the current landscape of large-scale musical theater productions where, following the model inherited from operetta, acting, whether through song, dance, or song, text, or dancing, is the dominant mode. Recently, though, gig theater has emerged as a more musician-first form in that productions have the setting, sound, feel, and audience interaction of a music gig, but also include acted spoken word and storytelling, often focused on social themes. Like mainstream actor-muso shows, gig theater calls for musicians to integrate acting and moving with played and sung music. Given its differences, though, gig theater sits at the conceptual boundary of what is considered musical theater, aligning more with what Martin Rebstock and David Rösner term music theater, the hallmark of which, along with a smaller scale, is a rebalancing of theatrical means that reflects the style of post-dramatic theater. The mainstream hit show The Choir of Man affects a similar rebalancing by replacing narrative plot with a theme conveyed in performance poetry and the foregrounding of music making and audience interaction. Perhaps tellingly, it is often assessed and is also marketed as more of a concert. There is a graphic missing in this slide, and it is the video that is to come later. Excellent. Yeah. Thank you very much. Some actor, musician, show directors, and choreographers have also centered the musician in the making process. Harrison highlights the work of Stephen Hoggett, co-founder of the physical theater company Frantic Assembly, on the multi-award-winning musical Once, for which Hoggett turned not only to music's notation, but also observed the movements of the actor-musicians as they learned their parts with the musical director, using these to guide the choreography of the dance numbers. Hoggett draws an important distinction, though, between Once's choreography and typical musical theater dance, saying that a quadruple threat is just not the right way to think about it. It doesn't turn the ensemble into technically proficient dancers, but instead accesses and visually amplifies the ways that musicians move when they play. And here is a quick 37-second clip of Hoggett's choreography, hopefully.
Video hasn't pulled through.
Video hasn't pulled through.
No.
Should I get my data stick?
It's okay, I can get it. Sorry. 1 second, everyone.
Slides that look the same.
Yeah. One sec.
Sorry.
Let me see if it comes on here.
This hasn't got a USB port even, has it? Or can I put it in over here?
Yeah, that might work better. Yeah, that should come in. Is it this one?
Gold clip. Ooh.
No.
Like she's there. And to get me back to my presentation.
It should just be behind here. Here we go.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hoggett's choreographic approach points to a first primary sensitivity that musicians develop as they acquire proficiency, the connection between sound and corporeal movement. Music researchers Alexander Jensenius and Marcelo Wanderley point out that musicians' movements serve an array of purposes. Am I on the right slide? There we go. To produce, modify, or accompany played sounds, to communicate practically or expressively to other musicians, an audience, or to the musician themselves, and they can also be theatrically performative, sometimes all at once. Harrison recognizes musicality as the meeting place of the actor and the musician, noting its importance in liberating and exploring the actor and character's inner life, and cites its importance in actor training methods. Interestingly, though, Hoggett chose to capture the musician's spontaneous gestures without revealing to them that he was watching them with the intent to choreograph from their movements, making them inadvertently rather than explicitly complicit in the process at that stage. Gesett-Siemer rehabilitates the term complicity, which I consider to be another primary sensitivity of musicians, from its negative connotations by defining it as joint action between co-perpetrators and applying it to arts research. Essentially, the complicit performer makes themselves available for participation in others' actions while retaining their own agency, an intimate, daring, and profoundly embodied work that closely binds the ensemble in practice. As she notes, we all act as accomplices through looks, gestures, and coded behavior in more or less conscious ways when intending to co-create with others. As Siemer emphasizes, though, theatrical complicity does not necessarily imply compliance, but is a situational agreement that is contingent on provoking and dealing with the unexpected. The theater games, quote unquote, used in actor training serve to progressively develop actors' abilities to be responsively complicit and react to emergent situations in productive, non-habitual ways. As well, actors are trained to view even scripted performance as reliant not on repetition, but instead on instinctive response to one's own and others' delivery. This is paralleled in ensemble music playing, particularly in improvisational contexts. In an article on optimizing organizational practices in business, Frank Barrett turns to jazz improvisation, outlining 7 key features, and these have some parallels with Jackie's findings. Provocative competence, embrace of errors, shared orientation toward minimal structures allowing maximum flexibility, a distributed and negotiated task, reliance on retrospective sense-making, hanging out as a member of a community of practice, and turn-taking in leading and supporting. Barrett highlights learning to improvise as preparing to be spontaneous, with the ultimate goal of being able to strategically suspend the habitual and automatic in favor of being in the groove, surrendering to the emerging musical moment. This requires attention and responsiveness to others and one's own intentions, as well as to the contours of any musical task at hand. This will not be news to improvising musicians, but the parallel to skilled acting is striking. Stefan Love extends this parallel through a perspective informed by ecological psychology, relying on David Sudnow's spatial view of improvisation as navigation or moving from place to place in an unfolding musical landscape. Noting variances across different jazz genres in terms of their structural, metrical, harmonic, and rhythmic constraints, Love compares the tonal jazz environment to that of free jazz, within which the performer must learn to perceive affordances that emerge from the ensemble's spontaneous collective choices. Though any proficient jazz improviser will develop the capacity to perceive well-suited affordances for action in line with genre conventions, the free jazz context, in which the ensemble creates the musical environment de novo, aligns with both devised acting processes and in-the-moment responsiveness in scripted material, which also demands complicit spontaneity between participants. Leaving acting processes aside, there are 2 more threats to consider: singing, together with the theatrical use of the speaking voice, and dancing. There is obviously no substitute for advanced performer training to obtain expert technical levels in these areas, but it is worth pointing out that musicians do commonly sing and vocalize in practice to convey musical ideas to each other. Here as well, though, I hold that musicianship and its training develop a 3rd sensitivity that optimizes the intermedial transfer of skills to these domains. As Jonathan D'Souza notes, musicians develop physical and perceptual skills, some shared with other instrumentalists, but others specific to the instrument they play. In this way, instruments become tools for musical thinking, influencing the player's embodied thought and perception, and through this, also influencing how the player understands music theoretically. But research reveals that this influence on perception and cognition extends beyond instrumental sound to the domain of the voice, with the acoustic commonalities between musical and vocal emotion well recognized in the literature. In both music and speech, emotions are characterized by similar patterns of acoustic cues, such as fundamental frequency, amplitude, timing, or timbre. A study involving expert young and middle-aged adult musicians found them to be significantly more accurate than musically naive listeners when in recognizing emotions in speech prosody, the qualities that contribute to its expressivity, across 6 universal emotions, while a similar study shown here found semi-professional musicians to outperform non-musicians in vocal emotion perception when the fundamental frequency was manipulated, but not when timbre was. These results corroborate with findings suggesting that the link between musicality and vocal emotion perception is mediated by low-level auditory sensitivity, particularly to pitch, and suggest a link to enhanced empathy among musicians that is also ratified in research on musicians' ensemble practice. It stands to reason that musicians' significantly enhanced performance in vocal emotion recognition would offer them an advantage in learning both how to produce theatrical speech and to act through song, as well as to discern fine-grained emotional cues in others' performance. Harrison notes that in creative actor-musician processes, the music comes first, with movement exploration following when deemed feasible. Where dance and stage movement are concerned, it's worth noting that dancing in actor-musician shows is often reduced in amount, scale, and technical demand, as the actions of playing offer their own visual impact. Movement at any given moment is also constrained by the score and instruments to avoid interruption of tone, so no trumpet players jumping off of tables while playing, or danger to performers or instruments. The job of the actor-muso show choreographer is to gauge and negotiate the dual physical demands of playing and moving choreographically by harmonizing dance movements, which are temporal and dynamic relations with space, with the manual, spatial, and music gestural actions of playing to facilitate their joint performance. Typically, the process is collaborative, with the performers feeding back on the fit of choreography to playing. Given the common ground of producing rhythm, tempi, dynamics, textures, articulations, etc., through the actions of the body, choreography can be conceived as visual music, also given that it is almost always crafted to reflect its musical accompaniment. Musicians then have a built-in advantage for learning movement patterns, structures, and dynamic nuances, though again, there is no substitute for formal training to achieve greater levels of proficiency. Just to wrap up, in this talk, I've detailed the history and development of the actor-musician, highlighting a move toward putting the music first in gig theater and concert-like shows like The Choir of Man. By way of highlighting largely tacit skills that expert musicians possess, I mean to consider their ramifications for intermedial pedagogy and for shows, both in terms of process and performance. All 3 of the sensitivities I have described, the connection of sound to gesture, ensemble complicity, and enhanced auditory perceptual skills, have the potential to inform and enrich teaching of actor musicians, but also to scaffold the learning of the musician who wishes to expand their skill set and, ideally, their employability. For this journey, I hold that a pedagogy foregrounding reflection, where's Ben Jones? And its translation into practice would be highly valuable, encouraging musicians to cultivate explicit awareness of their perceptions, actions, images, and emotions when playing would provide ground for development as complicit collaborators, while apprehending the musicality of voices and considering how the actions and sound of playing might be transposed into choreographic movement can facilitate development as a speaking, singing, and moving performer. As far as shows go, and without the time to argue for appropriate economic recompense of quadruple threat performers by employers, perhaps the quadruple threat musician-actor points toward further exploration of post-dramatic styles of performance making, or even toward shows based on collaborative improvisation, again, notwithstanding the industry's relatively conservative approach to investing. I imagine, though, that the musician-actor might offer new ways of approaching intermedial performance and facilitate new thinking about what musical theater can be. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Freya. That was great. So do we have any questions? And so we'll go with Tom first, if that's okay, the second row.
Thanks, Freya. Thanks, Freya. That was very interesting. Thank you so much for that. It made me think about, so in a previous life, I was a lecturer at University Surrey. Before GSA moved to Surrey, and we had at that time, the faculty had just changed, and the faculty of drama effectively moved in next to us. We were in the same building. Despite that, we were completely diametrically separate in every way. We did not collaborate. There was some extracurricular things. Point being, really, in terms of with the curriculum hat on, what do you think are the barriers, or what do you think we should be doing in faculties or institutions where you do have those departments to do exactly what you're talking about here in terms of building out a curriculum which sponsors that?
It's a really good question, and I wish I had a silver bullet to be able to fix it. But especially in this time when individual disciplines are hard-pressed to prove their own value. Thank you. Yeah. When individual disciplines are hard-pressed to prove their own individual value, and imagine trying to come up with time to bring drama students together with music students and make something happen. As well, the question of expertise comes in, because these are budding actors and budding musicians. The question of how much could be expected to come together in a moment like that. But we've heard from other projects where novice musicians are interfacing with professionals, and we've also heard of projects suggesting the scaffolding of student performances by professional staff, the apprentice and expert model notwithstanding. So one option might be as simple as jamming, basically, creating opportunities for performers to show up and jam with each other. That assumes a certain level of either confidence or naivete, but showing up at a jam is already a big step, and seeing what happens. Maybe we're back in the fluxus and events zone of the 1970s, but that's what I'd suggest as a potential.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Shane?
Oh, Shane. I'm not Shane. I'm the other one.
That was brilliant. Please lean into this, because it's made, I think that this will be really successful. And I'll give 3 reasons why. One, it's cheaper, because you don't have to pay for a band and a cast. And so actually having the musicians performing on stage, if it's set up right, will present a much more viable opportunity for hosting a show. Secondly, the economics of show are much more substantial than the ridiculous economics of songwriting. Because once you put a show on, you start thinking about grand rights, and you start thinking about intellectual property that has a lot more potential muscle. So we're noticing songwriters moving into musical theatre because they can't afford to live off songs anymore because of streaming. And so, there's 2 kind of economic answers there. And then third, it makes me think of the 1975, who are about to headline Glastonbury. And they've created a show which is gig theatre. It's Matty Healy as actor and performer and, gig. It makes me think of Kendrick Lamar, who just performed at the Super Bowl. What was that? You think of Childish Gambino, you think of Little Sims, who's an actor, and this kind of using it. And then finally, we're noticing, aren't we, a theme of transdisciplinarities. And so I would argue quite strongly that we're moving beyond or to and or discipline separability was 20th century at best. But if we're moving to the 21st century, then it's networks culture, it's rhizomatic, and it's ands. So write the book, make the thing. I think this thing about not just actor, musician, but musician, actor, and the affordances that we can learn from the different things. And I think it could be a really, really successful program.
Thanks.
No question, just a lot of support to that.
Actor-musician programs already exist, but
Exactly.
my question was, if you went into a conservatory, for example, where music was the focus and wanted to develop actor-musicians or musician actors from there, how can you optimize that process? Because this is a differently abled population than someone whose focus has been acting and happens to play an instrument well. And it's not always a strict dichotomy. It's not that you know how to do one or the other. And this takes us into the tension that Harrison also signals between the idea of the jack of all trades and master of none, and the prestige that is granted to the person who can only do one thing really well, and how the triple threat and then the quadruple threat sits in the middle of them, and how we compensate someone being very good at several things and sometimes executing all of them in the same moment. Yes, it's cheaper. Yes, that's why actor-musician shows took off in the first place, because, hey, if you don't have to pay an orchestra, you can cut your overheads a little bit. And gig theater exists in a completely different economy than a large-scale, fully pre-produced, hope it's a hit kind of show. A gig show is booked. It's quick get in, quick get out when it's finished. It's not meant to play for 3 months, 3 years, tour around the world. Sometimes it is entirely created by its performers. It is entirely staged and set up by its performers and broken down by its performers. So it's a very, very different thing. That's where Choir of Man became interesting to me, because it is a proscenium stage work, but it is kind of acting like a gig musical in its own way. So I think there's room to grow. Audiences love it. Audiences don't know quite what to make of it. They say, they ask, is it a musical or is it not a musical, in cases like the Choir of Man.
Is there a question there? Is that Ben?
Yeah, I want to echo what Shane said and throw in just an additional and as well. From the contemporary live performance sector, from an employability standpoint, musical directors are now assuming that you can do this as a musician, that you can do some basic choreo as well. And some of my students have had a really rude awakening where they thought that their chops were going to carry them through onto this pop gig. And then the MD turns around and says, okay, great guys, so here's the choreo moves. And they can't even move in time with the playing. And as we look at shows getting bigger and bigger, we've just collaborated in Level 6 with WFB Collective, which is one of the big creative consultancies in the UK, just come off the Dua Lipa tour and all of that stuff. And we did a reproduction of the Grammy movements that the band had to do. Not one student could do it. And it was not even that complex. But the point is, the MD said, guys, this is what you also need to be thinking about as well, because pop contemporary live performance is not about technical ability. I mean, some of it is, but really this is about a show, because if you've got 40,000 people in a stadium, we need to see stuff from the back of the stadium just as much as the front, and that is now the visual aspect of performance. So there's a real employability need here as well for contemporary musicians to understand this. And I think that from our standpoint, we're starting to think about that much more, like what is performance, not just technique, and we can borrow from the acting side. So this is really, really interesting. I just wanted to echo that with Shane, but also throw that employability angle in as well.
Yeah, this is kind of where I'm sitting in my embodied research right now, and it's a really ticklish discussion to have with musicians, because I don't want to make anybody self-conscious about the way you move when you play music. And I play myself. I'm a very rusty and happily improvising flutist, and I've been told that I move a lot. Yeah, like a lot by musicians. So when a musician moves, part of it is going to be an encultured set of movements. Part of it is going to be something quite organic and personal, and by choice it can also be something extremely performative that you tack onto the top of it. And I am thinking of André Rieu right now, and his very, very theatrical sort of concerts. Yeah, people lap this stuff up. So it is a personal choice how performative to make your movements. But the absolute primary step is an awareness that one is moving, because focusing on the music, we've only got so much attentional resource. Takes away from the recognition that you are a moving, breathing, potentially moving around in space performer as you perform. Looking at yourself moving, or even finding the mental space to apprehend yourself as a mover, and an emoter, someone who has an inner life or even a character through the music or in dialogue with the music, are some really good first steps. Just to console you, it is really hard to look at choreography on video and try to reproduce it. It is a skill, because those steps tend to have names. There are tricks of the trade, and I can share some of them with you later to help you out with that. But it's not that easy. So.
When you were speaking earlier, it was making me think a bit of the early 80s Zappa bands as well, like the Does Humour Belong in Music gig. Mm-hmm. It almost is a show where everything's highly choreographed, and, you know, chops aside, that in terms of selecting that band, it was not only did you have to be a monster player, but you had to be able to do all these other things as well. Interestingly, there tended to be people who were either really into that or people who thought it was weird. But I think, yeah, we're probably moving into a space where it's almost becoming a quasi-expectation rather than something odd, you know.
Yeah. It's interesting. Last night I was watching a video. I was watching the 2022 Air Guitar World Competition, where there is no instrument. It's just the movements. And, you know, trying to imagine the space of the guitar in some of the playing. This is just a 1-minute clip if you want to look it up. Yeah, exactly. Well, I was writing my conclusion. Yeah, the virtual guitar is easier to imagine in some of the 3 players that they show than others, but that's not really what it's about. It's about the spectacle, it's about the musical relationship, etc. It's about choreography in that particular moment. They're not aiming for a realistic rendition of air guitar anymore. The discipline has emerged, and that's another paper that might be fun to write. But yeah.
Okay, guys, we should leave it there and take a quick break. Sorry, Tom. Just sort of. We've got another talk in about, should we say, let's still leave it as 10 minutes. We're running slightly over, but if we have 10 minutes from now, if that's all right with everyone, and we'll reconvene for the next talk. And then after that, it's the panel time. Thank you, Freya.
Something between us that is missing,